Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Filipino American Women Project, also known as TIFA Project for short. We have another special episode for Filipino American History Month. And if you find this conversation very compelling, remember, we have a phone number. You can either leave us a voice message or a text message. Either or is fine. I don't say call us because there's an unlikely chance that we're not going to pick up because we're millennials and we don't do that. But you can leave us a voice message or a text at 415-484-TFAW, as in the Filipino American Woman, or the number is 8329. So once again, you can leave us a voice message or a text at our phone number, 415-484-8329. All right. Now let me go ahead and bring on my amazing co-host who actually is out of town right now. And we're kind of winging this as we go. So Nani Dominguez, welcome back.
Thank you. Thank you. Hello, everybody.
Yes, and we are excited to bring on one of our amazing ates. This ate was in high demand to really be on our show, and we've heard about her through space. So, Nani, why don't you share with me or our listeners a little briefly about how you heard about Allyson here before we officially bring her on, and what compelled you to reach out to her?
We have gotten a bunch of referrals and requests for Allyson to be on our show. So lots of people are curious about your story. Two of those people being previous guests that we've interviewed on the show, JL, which was episode 16, I believe, and Nicole, who was episode 71 or 72. And then in addition to that, my cousin, Kiani, she was a member of the PEP program that Allyson runs that I've heard so much about, and also is a mentee of yours. So yeah, we're very excited to hear your story and also share it with our listeners here.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Nani, for giving us a little backstory as to why we have her on. So without further ado, we have Ate Dr. Allyson Tintiangco-Cubales. Ate, welcome to the show.
Oh my gosh, thank you for having me. I really appreciate this. What an honor to be on a show with two Pinay hosts. That's fabulous.
Yes.
I get to see this often or hear this often. So I just really appreciate both of you. I love the sisterhood between the two of you too.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much for saying that. Nani and myself, our backstory is it actually happened really organically. I started this show, or at least the podcast version of it, just last summer of 2019. And about 6 episodes in, Nani reached out to me and she didn't know how she wanted to get involved. She just wanted to. So I was like, why don't you co-host with me? And then we'll figure it out. And then here we are 70 plus episodes later. And it's just been an absolute pleasure having Nani. She's kind of like the person that's really good at paraphrasing what I'm trying to say. And especially this year, I have to give it to Nani for having spent most of the year actually doing her own research and studying more of her culture. So Nani, it's a pleasure to be on this journey with you and continue to interview incredible people such as Ate Allyson.
Thank you. Yeah, no, the opportunity is mine, I guess. And I'm the grateful one, I feel like, to be here. So thank you for that.
Yeah. Well, Ate Allyson, as Nani had alluded to, we are just extremely excited to chat with you today. And I just thought I'd start with an icebreaker question because, as you know, 2020 is a very interesting year. So how have you settled into the new normal if you kind of found your, order in chaos? How has that been for you?
It's too bad people can't see my face. Settling in is not the way I would describe my life right now. This particular moment, I believe we're in a time of crisis. I'll just be real with you. Like, I don't feel settled. I feel the opposite of settled. These months that we've been in quarantine have just magnified what's happening in the world. It's actually been happening in the world. And I think we were sick before this pandemic. So I don't necessarily feel like I'm settled. I'm definitely trying to think about the notion of care, which means caring for myself and then caring for our communities, like in this current time of crisis, which in many ways allows me the opportunity to feel more connected to people. But settled, probably not. That's probably far from what I'm feeling right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, I love that you touched on the fact that I think that we have been sick for a while and we're just all, it's kind of like the cover is coming off now and we're seeing what that looks like, where before we were able to mask it with, whatever we were running around doing. And now we're being forced to hold still in place and really confront those ugly monsters that are behind that cover. So yeah, I appreciate the transparency. I know that I think people are getting kind of complacent now in quarantine and starting to loosen up a little bit on the social distancing or quarantine in general. And, I also understand that kind of impatience or whatever you want to call it, but we're still very much in an unsettling time right now.
Yeah, I really like the word unsettle. I think that's a very honest and real way to describe right now. I feel like I should have rephrased the question. Maybe I should have said, how are you holding up? And everything. But obviously you are here, to have the conversation with us today. So, and I think that I have found that in this time, people are speaking up more than ever. And I'm really happy for that. And I'm happy that our podcast is kind of during a time where people want to be more vocal and want to share their story and everything. Speaking of which, I was watching a video where you were talking at TFCU here, TFCU Talk San Diego, Jose, and you were talking about ethnic studies. And the key thing I got from the video is that it's important to acknowledge our own narrative. And, part of what we do here out there is that it's all about amplifying our stories and amplifying our narratives and owning it. And in a way, it's upsetting to me that that's where we have to start, where some people have already owned their story and they've already been allowed or entitled to own their story. And for us as, Philippine American people, like we have to go back and be like, you need to acknowledge your story. And so let's start with this, Ate Allyson. I'm curious if you could start with sharing your story and how that led you to being an advocate for having people like us, acknowledge their own narratives and their own stories.
Well, okay. Thank you for asking about my story. I think oftentimes we don't ask people about their story. We make a lot of assumptions about people. And I think especially in school and in education, lots of assumptions were made about me. And so I think about when you ask me that question, it's kind of emotional because I feel like our stories are the one things that belong to us, our experience. And when those are not acknowledged, then it feels like we are of no value. And so I appreciate the question around story. And so for me, when I think of my story, I mean, I could give you a really pretty picture of how I ended up as a professor. That would not be the truth. That would be so far from the truth.
Be real with us. Like shoes are off, or chinelas are off.
Shoes are off.
Yeah, shoes are off, right? No, we got wine on the table, figuratively speaking. Like I want the down dirty. I want the truth.
I'm actually a tequila girl, so we'll see.
Okay, that works too.
That works. We can do tequila.
The Casamigos shots are on the table.
Okay. Don Julio. Yeah. Okay. We can just teasing. So yeah, putting everything aside and just saying it for real, I really have a love-hate relationship with education. And what I mean by that is I feel like I owe it to my teachers. I really do owe it to my teachers. The ones who hated me, I owe it to them to be able to say that who I am today is because of them.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is like I had most of my teachers hated me.
Wow.
But I had one teacher who loved me. It took one teacher. And I was at a community college called Ohlone Community College. By the way, we're on Ohlone land. And so I just want to make sure that I acknowledge, like we're on stolen land. Or I am. I'm on Ohlone land.
Yes, I am as well.
Okay, nice. So I just want to acknowledge that. I went to Ohlone College. Because I couldn't get into any college. Because when I graduated high school, I think I broke a 1.83 average at some point. Yeah, nice. I did graduate though. Like I was to graduate. I took high school, summer school. Like I did everything I could to graduate just so I could party with my friends though. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like that's about getting the degree. I I ended up graduating. And then I couldn't really get into any college. My mom said I had to go to college. She said, you need to go to college because you need health insurance. Let's be real. And you need to go to college to get health insurance. And the only way you're going to get your ass some health insurance is if you go to a community college, take 12 units, and get on your dad's health insurance. Like, she was just being real with me. And my dad was a janitor at Kaiser Permanente. And that was the best thing that he could give us, was the health insurance on his plan. So that's what I did. I went to Ohlone College, took 12 units and turned it in to my dad and, got health insurance. I happened to land in a class, though, this class called Ethnic Studies, Introduction to Ethnic Studies. And I was just taking that class because I was trying to get units and it said transferable. And someone told me at some point that when you go to a community college, you should take courses that are transferable. So I just took that course randomly. And I took it with my friends. And so, hanging out with your friends at community college is like extension of high school, right? So we were just in that class, having a good old time. And that's the thing is I wasn't really there. I didn't have any intentions, but boy, did my teacher have some intentions. He wanted to make sure that every single person in that class knew about what was happening in the world. And so he was talking all kinds of crazy stuff. So this professor, his name was Ramon Quesada, he wanted to make sure that everyone in the class knew what was happening in the world. And he would ask us all kinds of questions, about what we understood about our lives. He asked questions about what we experienced and, how we understood the social politic of the world. And the thing is he asked this question and no one had ever really asked it of me. And he said, have you experienced racism? He was talking to me and the whole class, right? And of course I said no. I said no. I mean, this is in the late...
because you couldn't recognize it. You're right.
I couldn't recognize it. And also in the late 80s, we were just coming off the Reagan era. And we were like, we haven't experienced racism. You're supposed to, work your butt off and pick yourself up by your bootstraps. And that's how you're supposed to succeed. There was no excuses, right? And I always blamed myself for not doing well in school. I blamed everything on me. And actually, everybody blamed it on me, And so I felt like it was my fault. And I think sometimes we impose that on our children now. But so blaming, there's a lot of blaming on myself. I really felt like I didn't have what it took to do well in school. But this professor seemed to think otherwise, right? So along with telling us that he said, you're all wrong. When we said, no, we haven't experienced racism, he said, you're all wrong. And basically, everybody who's a person of color in this class has experienced racism. And I was like,
you just don't know it.
Exactly. They start naming things, down to name calling or people underestimating you. And he started naming things that actually related to my life. And I was like, oh, I guess when people called me those really bad racial nicknames like bonsai or ching chong or all those things, that must have been racism. And I really didn't recognize it in those ways.
Yeah, because it's so normalized, right?
Super normalized. And it was kind of weird for someone to speak up during that time, it felt like. Right? So this is, again, it's the late 80s, and all kinds of stuff were happening. And I basically started to open up. My world started to open up because of this one professor. I wrote a paper in that class. I don't know if when you saw the TFCU video, I talked about it a little bit, but I'll talk about it here too, I wrote a paper in that class about racism after they explained what it was. And a week after I turned it in, he said, okay, I need to talk to you. And I was like, oh, shit. Because anytime any teacher or administrator or anyone of authority said I needed to talk to you, I knew my shit was in trouble.
Yeah, you're like, what did I do?
I'm always doing something, right? I totally thought I was in trouble. And I waited till after class and, I'm shitting my pants the whole class period, right? And then I go up to him at the end and I'm like, okay, what did I do? And he was like, I need to give you something. So he pulled out of his bag. He's like, handed me this paper. It was my paper. And on the front of the paper, it had a big A on it.
Wow.
And I looked at it and I'm like, what's this?
This is not mine.
Right. Like I was so confused. And he was like, I just want to let you know that you wrote a good paper.
Wow.
And I was like, whoa, because I'd never even had a compliment about anything academic before. Mm-hmm. And I said, thank you. And he was like, okay, I need to talk to you about your future. And he said a few words to me. He said, you do know that you have the potential to succeed.
Wow.
And I said, what? And he's like, you have the potential to succeed. Mm-hmm. And I had never heard anything like that before. I had never had anyone have that much faith in me. I mean, I literally thought I was tanga most of my life, like, right. Like that I was an airhead, like, yeah, I really wasn't going to amount to anything, so to have a professor say you have the potential to succeed was the transformative moment of my entire career.
Mm-hmm. Wow. I mean, just coming from like being around a lot of your teacher haters, just not believing in you, or you're always feeling like you're in trouble, to having this one out of nowhere give you an A and even tell you that you wrote something good and said that you have potential, must have been just mind blowing for you.
It was mind blowing at the moment, but when I think back to it now, it really is the magic. Like when I think of why I work with teachers every day of my life, like because I believe they are the X factor. Like they have the potential. I'm sure that both of you had a great teacher, that at least one that had some faith in you, that allowed you to think about yourself with value.
Yeah. There was something else that you had said in the TFCU Talks YouTube video that my cousin Kiani had sent me. And it was like, you never wanted to go to college. You didn't have big career aspirations. You were like, oh, when your teacher told you could really be somebody, you were like, oh, no, it's cool. Like, I'm cool with not being somebody. And that really, really resonated with me, because I feel like I have felt the same way throughout my life. And I didn't give school maybe enough of a chance as I should have. And, I definitely had teachers here and there that were like, hey, this is really good. Like, you should run with this. And that was always my response. Like, oh, no, it's okay. Because I'm so used to, in Filipino culture, it's not about, I feel like, at least my elders didn't encourage me to chase after my dreams, rather than fall in line and do what you're told and follow this path and become a doctor, become a lawyer. And if you're not going to do that, then marry one, And so that, I think, experience is something that I look at, you talking about, and I'm like, wow, if only I had someone like that in my life at that time, not that it's ever too late. It's never too late to dive into your strengths and figure out how to leverage them to your advantage. But I didn't have a mentor like that, and so I ended up not going to school. And what I do now is completely unrelated from what I had any interest in at that time. And it's just interesting to see, to look back on how things played out and just see why they went the way that they did, or how differently it could have gone if you just had one person to encourage you in that way. And outside of your family, there's really not a lot of opportunity for that if you don't go to school, or if you don't have teachers in your life like that to kind of pay attention to you. So I appreciate that story, because I think it's also really relatable, coming from a place where like, oh yeah, I see all this madness going on in the world, but like that doesn't apply to me. I haven't experienced that. I'm neither here nor there. When it's like, no, when you sit down and learn about what racism is, what sexism is, etc., it's like, oh, I see this everywhere I go,
First off, Nani, I just want to say thank you for being vulnerable and sharing your part of the story, and I'm just going to let you know now, I'm down for you. If you ever need anything, I don't have to be formally your teacher to actually be someone who can be your cheerleader.
Yes, you're a true ate, yes.
That's why we call you out there from the beginning. We knew.
I will say, if anyone ever asks me like what I know I'm good at is I'm a hella good cheerleader.
Yeah,
I will cheer you on. And if you ever need any support, say you want to go back to school, I don't know, I'll help you do that. And even if you don't, like if there's something that I can do to support you in your dreams, let me know. I mean, I feel like that's what I was put on this earth to do. And that's why I had the opportunity to have a great teacher encourage me so that I can do work like this and also be able to support other people like yourself.
Absolutely. I appreciate that so much. Thank you.
Yeah, well, you heard it here and it's recorded, so you can't take it back. No, I love that out there. Thank you so much. And also Nani for sharing your vulnerability as well. You know, when we talk about that one teacher that stood out to us, I never really thought about that, but I was really reflecting just now, like who, you know, maybe just a handful of teachers that I felt like were really advocates for me. But I think because of my own cultural upbringing of not asking, like not speaking out of line or not raising your hand, like, you know, kind of staying within the lines, it was always really difficult for me. I felt a sense of shame to actually reach out to my teachers. I remember I had one that I really liked in second grade, and it was kind of one of those things where it's like, she was a very proactive teacher and always reached out to me, and I really appreciated it. But I was always afraid to kind of return the favor and reach out to her. And then I think about in high school, I had this very committed track and field and cross country coach that was just so dedicated to our success. He wouldn't take no for an answer. He really taught me like some fundamental values of discipline and persistence and all of that. And then in college, shout out to Dr. Ray Monzon at San Diego State University. He's half Filipino and Hispanic, I believe, but he was he got a doctorate in psychology, and he dedicated a lot of his work to putting Filipinos in the bubble, in the bubble when you're filling out those forms of like demographics, and even like helping with stats for giving like Filipinos recognition or stats on like what it's like for them to transition from high school to college, for example, because in his study, he found that a lot of Filipinos were like A students in high school, but then once they get into college, they're like either college dropouts or they end up in academic probation or they take forever to finish college. And it's because there's like a shift that happens where I think, from high school, you go from sort of a place of order to college where you have the sense of freedom for the first time in your life. And it's just a different thing to balance there. I could be totally butchering the whole study, but the point is that I just think about these key teachers that really resonated with me. And I think he was one of the few that I actually did sort of talk to a lot, but just that whole fear of like, oh, am I allowed to reach out to them? I didn't realize you're allowed to do that with your teachers. And if I were to go back to school, I would be like such an engaged student. Like I'd be raising my hand, sitting in the front row. Like if I were to do it all over again, knowing what I know now,
it would be different.
Yeah, I would be a much better student. But I had a lot of shame just growing up in the school system. I honestly did. Yeah. And I like to jokingly say that I'm a master's dropout because I got accepted into my master's program, but I never went through with it. And I only did that because of just that stereotype that I felt like I needed to live up to, that I needed to be academically smart. So when I did get it, I was like, oh, cool, I'm capable of that. And then that's it. I just didn't go to school anymore. In 10 plus years later, here I am, and I'm doing just fine without a master's degree. But, anyway, that's just what I think about when I think about school and those key teachers that motivated me, or at least that believed in me and saw me. And I think, even just one professor really makes a difference.
I totally agree. I totally agree that it takes one professor, it takes one teacher, and it takes one person, to tell you, hey, like you're worthy. Mm-hmm. You are somebody, like I think that's really important. And I oftentimes hope that I'm that teacher for people. Yeah. That I'm the one who gets to tell them every day, like that you're worthy, that you're smart, that you have the potential, that you're loved. Like a lot of my students trip out because like a week into the semester, here's this professor telling us that she loves us. What's that? And even more so on Zoom, like this year, like, the first day of class, I was like, I don't know if anyone said this to you during this week, but I'm going to tell you all I love you.
Wow. I
saw eyes kind of go, whoa, that's serious. But I do believe it. I believe people need to be loved. I believe the teachers need to love their students. I think some people don't believe that, and I'm okay with them not believing that, but I feel like it's important and it makes us effective if we can actually like see our students for their humanness and love their humanness. So
yeah, absolutely. Ate, so, we talked about your background of not being the perfect student, and here you are with a PhD and you're teaching. Tell me about that journey. Like, how did you decide, like, yeah, school wasn't for me, and yet here you are in the school system? Like, how did you decide, and what was that journey like for you to be where you are today?
Well, I will say that it was that one teacher. So all my teachers hated me except one, right? And I had one teacher who loved me. And he really, changed my life. His name was Ramon Quesada. But then from that point on, I sought out teachers and professors and community leaders who I knew would give me the same kind of love or support. And so that really was the way I ended up going from Ohlone College and transferring to a place called UC Berkeley. Some people may know that place.
Woo, woo. Yes.
Yes.
And I mean, imagine that, like this, the young Pinay who everyone thought was going to fail ended up at a place called Berkeley. And I did not change that much. So I was still good. I think there's a word now for people like us, like ratchet or something like that. But then I was still the same kind of cray little backtalker. I talked back a lot. And it's so interesting because I think about that experience. I'm like, gosh, luckily I wasn't scared to talk back, I was definitely, I think when you were talking about not approaching the teacher and, not wanting to make any trouble, that kind of way, right? And we're taught that way. Even my parents, taught me that. My mom especially was very much don't rock the boat, and there's something to that, right? Like, I believe what I learned from my mom was humility. The danger in that is when I took humility to self-deprecation.
Another level, right?
And then when I would get into spaces like Berkeley, I would take that into feeling like I was an imposter.
Yeah.
So this idea of the imposter syndrome or imposter's phenomena that is out there, feeling like I was not worthy, right? So I think it's okay to be humble. It's good to be humble. You don't want to be bragging about all your shit all the time, But I also feel like humility is one thing, but taking it to the point where you feel imposter is dangerous.
Yeah.
So I went through this whole journey. I ended up at UC Berkeley. I felt like I was an imposter, but you know what? I still went for it, right? And I was very loud and active. And at that point in my life, I was angry. I'm still angry, but at that point was the beginning of my anger towards systems that were oppressive. And so I got really involved in all kinds of things, especially the fight for ethnic studies. And I started that journey when I was at Ohlone in that ethnic studies class that I took. Fought for ethnic studies at Ohlone, and then fought for ethnic studies at UC Berkeley. And so, and that journey never ended. Like I'm still fighting for ethnic studies now. Yeah, it's really my life, and I went from Berkeley and surprised my family because I ended up being the keynote speaker for graduation, and my family was like, please don't say anything bad about us. I think they were just shocked, that I was up there. And then all of a sudden I was, the speaker, and I had done well enough in school to graduate from this place called UC Berkeley, which a lot of people assume is for the smart people. And I gained access. To an education that not too many people get the opportunity to have.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I worked a while before I decided to go on to graduate school. I was really encouraged by some graduate students. I had one specifically, Monty Fuse, African American graduate student in ethnic studies. And he was like, you need to go get a PhD. And I did not really know what that meant.
Yeah.
I was like, okay, I guess so, he's like, you can be a doctor of philosophy in ethnic studies. And I was like, okay. And I didn't really know what I was getting into, but I realized I wanted to do something. I wanted to change the systems of education that were oppressing me and oppressing people like. And so I went on to apply to PhD programs, got into the number one education program in the nation, which was at UCLA. And so I went to UCLA to get a PhD in education, the first Pinay to finish her PhD in education at UCLA.
Okay.
Damn.
So I'll be humble, but I'm also going to say that shit was hard.
Yeah.
You can see
You did that.
And I didn't really have too many examples on how to do that.
Yeah.
Right.
So
you were navigating that space on your own.
Totally. But I luckily met this person. Her name was Dawn Mabalon, or Dawn Buholano Mabalon. And she was getting her master's, or she was working at UCLA and then eventually got her master's from UCLA in Asian American Studies. She became my lifeline some of you might know about her, but she was phenomenal in everything that she did. And so she ended up getting a master's in Asian American Studies. We ended up being roommates, which I totally, brag about, because living with Dawn meant we always ate good.
Yeah.
And we always life, and we always had a party going on,
I love it.
Yes.
Yeah. So Dawn Mabalan, she was from Stockton. She was also a community college transfer. And we had so much in common, and we wanted to take on the world. So she was literally my roll dog, or whatever you want to call it, like my homie for life, my BFF that I met at UCLA. And that's actually, I owe it to her that, that I was able to get through such a difficult program and such a hard situation, being very much alone, in that process. So I don't know if you all know Dr. Dawn Boholana Mabalon, but she was very much instrumental in creating Filipino American History Month. And she was one of the people from FANHS that really made that happen.
Okay.
She was the one who emphasized history, not heritage. This is History Month. This is about our histories, our stories, and so that really kind of brings us full circle. If you didn't know, the two of you, if you didn't know, Dawn Mabalon, Dr. Dawn Boholana Mabalon passed away in 2018.
Oh my gosh. No, I didn't know.
She was very young, and it was traumatic in my life and the life of many. But her contributions are immense. Like, we can't even measure.
Immeasurable. Yeah.
Immeasurable. Yeah. Her contributions were immeasurable. I'm currently working on writing her story, children's book, or a middle schooler book on Dawn's story. So that's hopefully going to come out in the next 5 years for young people to learn about Dawn and for us to remember her legacy.
Wow, that's so beautiful. Like, how inspirational that you are taking that task on of writing a book about her life to educate people, since, she was gone too soon and we didn't get to know her for ourselves. I mean, I'm sure many people did, but for those of us who didn't.
Yeah, I don't think of it as work. I think of it as, like in memory of her, and just giving back to her life that she's given so many.
Yeah. I'm so sorry for your loss too.
Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that story out there. And it's an honor to know that in talking to you and knowing that you were associated, with someone who created history for us, because Nani and I had recently learned that Filipino American History Month is still pretty young. Like, it was established, I believe, in 2009. And so from what our understanding from the FANHS website. And so it's so great to know someone who knew someone who was really a part of that change.
Definitely Dawn was part of that. Also, I should mention Fred Cordova, Dorothy Cordova, Emily Lawson, Joan May Cordova. All those people really were at the forefront of Filipino American History Month.
Wow, that's amazing. So as we know, the theme, according to FANHS, and if people are wondering what FANHS is the Filipino American National Historical Society. The website is FANHS-national.org. And also include that in the show notes for any of you that want to learn more about FANHS. So this year, the theme for Filipino American History Month is the history of Filipino American activism. So Ate Allyson, I wanted to ask you what this month means to you, particularly because it's specifically about activism.
Ooh, that's a good question. I would have never thought to answer, what does this month mean to me? First off, I think Filipino American History Month is always about activism. I think this particular year, the emphasis is important because it means that we are saying that we have to be active in the world. We have to do what we say.
Yeah.
So I think it's really important to consider, like, if we're saying that this is a specific focus on activism this year, we also want to think deeply about our legacy of activism. Like, Filipinx, Filipinos, we're never silent. Even though, like, I think we're always seen as such, or Asian Americans are seen as apolitical, I don't think that is correct to identify our community as such. We have been active for a very, very long time, and we've been fighting all kinds of things. We would not have ethnic studies if it wasn't for people, including Filipinos, Filipinexes, fighting for ethnic studies since even before the 60s, specifically, though, in relation to ethnic studies, the establishment of ethnic studies at San Francisco State. Filipinexes were involved with PACE, the Filipino American Collegiate Endeavor, that were then involved with the Third World Liberation Front. So I think those moments, like where we were already involved. I also think of the current moment where we are fighting to be activists.
Yeah.
I think at this particular moment, activism is seen as terrorism. Particularly in the
at least to Duterte, yeah.
Right? So I think it's really important to consider when we say that this particular year we're focusing on activism, we're actually focusing on radicalism. We're focusing on saying, hey, you know what? You cannot keep us silent. We are going to be active. And even an anti-terror bill, which, is in many ways its own level of terrorism against activists.
Yeah.
And we need to think about that. People are fighting for liberation, and that's seen as terrorism.
Yeah. Fighting for human rights is not terrorism.
Exactly. And that's activism, right? And so activism is something that we need to celebrate. People also need to understand that it is dangerous and that danger is necessary. That we actually have to do something. We can't just be sitting around saying this is what we should do. Or to be quite honest, I love that people are posting a lot of things, and this generation is doing a lot of great stuff on the web and all these different apps. But we also need to make sure that we understand that we can't just be symbolic about our activism.
Wow.
We have to embody activism. We have to understand that it's going to require us to go in and change policy. It's going to require us to go in and change the people in power. It's going to require us to go in and really think about how do we change systems that have been consistently oppressive to people like us.
Yeah. We have to show up.
We have to show up, and we have to make real change. And it's not just about posting stuff. I appreciate a good post, out on the internet. I love it. I'm like, oh, that's a good post. But I really have to say, we need to grind. Every single day, I work with people who are grinding in the classroom. For me, that's activism. When you get radical teachers grinding, working their butt off for the students so that they can build spaces where young people and not so young people can become well, or can become whole, or or have moments of healing. To me, that's activism. And so although I believe it's important to go out into the streets with a picket sign and say, look, this is what we believe. To me, that's activism. But activism is also what happens in our classrooms. And sometimes it happens on Zoom. And a lot of times it happens when we are fighting, against policies that have been oppressive, or it means that we have to fight for policies that are not oppressive, so I think it's really important to consider, what are we going to do? That activism has to go beyond symbolism. We have to do something that is actually going to create change and real change for our communities, because our communities are suffering. And our communities are being attacked, and our communities are experiencing state-sanctioned violence. To me, there is no reason for us to sit back and just say, okay, that I'm just going to let this happen to me. We can't. Activism means we need to be active. We need to do something.
Yeah, there's the word active in activism.
Sorry, I'm getting all warm right now.
I absolutely love it.
Please keep going. I appreciate the candor, because I think that our community sometimes needs to hear this message. I think that we've said this message in so many ways, so many times, but sometimes it takes that kind of tone and that kind of attitude for people to really wake up and be like, oh, so posting memes is, educational and all, it's informational for the community, but also plug in whatever space you're already in. It doesn't have to be, activism doesn't have to be an inconvenient thing that, sucks life out of you. It's like whatever your current space is, whether that's academia or your workplace or whatever, your family, even social circles, apply it, in real life. The stuff that you're posting about, apply it, like do it. Mm-hmm. Yeah, exemplify it. And so I appreciate that passion that you have.
Yeah, for sure. Wow. I mean, I think this is a great way to wake people up or get them fired up, to take action and really take advantage of the word active and the word activism. Allyson, it's been such an absolute pleasure speaking with you today. Again, just like what Nani said, I appreciate your candor, your openness, your transparency, your heart, your passion in what you do. Just like at the very beginning, we called you out there for a reason. And I think you really showed that to us and to our listeners today. Before we go, any parting advice or words of wisdom that you want to share in theme of the history of Filipino American activism?
How much time do I have?
It's up to you out there. We're on your schedule.
Yes, I'm messing with you because, I got all kinds of stuff to say. It would be wrong for me to be on a show with two Pinays and not talk about Pinayism. Mm-hmm. Although I appreciate, the focus on my story and all of that, but I want to just come in a little bit and say that I appreciate the two of you because what you all are doing and who you're highlighting on these shows and bringing Pinays, to the forefront, that's Pinayism. And so I say that because it's really important for me to acknowledge the beauty in the work that you're doing. So I'll say Pinayism because Pinayism is really important to identify. Mm-hmm. And I'll state it for you because sometimes people don't know what Pinayism is. And it's something that it's 25 years old. Pinayism is a 25-year-old concept that I helped create 25 years ago.
Which you coined, right?
I coined, but I didn't create it on my own, so okay. I'm not going to play
Give
like
credit
that.
Where credit's due. Yes.
So I will share it with you just so that the listeners will know what it is. And I won't talk a lot about it, but I'll at least share a little bit because it wouldn't be right because we're three Pinays sitting on this call,
Yes, so, that's right.
Pinayism is this radical Pinay sisterhood. Okay? So that's where it all begins. This radical Pinay sisterhood that connects three things: the global, the local, and the personal stories.
Wow.
Of Pinays, right? So the stories of Pinays, but our stories are so diverse, right? So our stories are about struggle, they're about survival, about service, about sisterhood, and about strength. Mm-hmm. And so Pinayism is really about uplifting us mentally, physically, politically, and spiritually. And so I believe what you all are doing is Pinayism.
Oh my gosh.
Like this, to me, is really what you all have been doing for how many, I don't know, 80 something episodes already. Like, you've been doing this and you need to be complimented for this work. I love you both. Like, I really feel like it's so necessary to just pause and say, thank you. Thank you to both of you. What you're doing is a good thing. And I hope you know that it really means a lot that you brought me onto this show. And it means a lot that you're bringing on a lot of Pinays to this show, because basically you all are exemplifying Pinayism. So thank you.
Oh my gosh, Nani, we got the Allyson approval, stamp of approval.
I know. I have goosebumps. Thank you for that. No, we really appreciate that.
Yeah, exactly. It's nice to be recognized, like what the work that we're doing. And we get a lot and we're absolutely appreciative of it, but we can never get enough of it. Every time, literally today before this conversation, I got a text message, Nani, from one of our listeners just expressing how grateful they are for the show because they are.
I responded to it.
Oh, good. Yeah. She's going through a hard time right now. And she says this show is really helping her. But thank you. We make it our job to help our fellow Pinays feel seen, heard, validated, loved. And it's absolutely so nice when it's reciprocated, when someone can turn around and say, thank you, for what you're doing. And it's not necessarily like a, egotistical thing. It's like, this is another affirmation that we're on the right track and we're doing the right thing for our community. So thank you so much for saying that out there. All right. Well, I think that wraps it up, y'all. Up at Allyson, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on our show. Thank you again so much for your time and the work that you're doing today. And we're just so grateful to have you here. And we're excited that our lives have intertwined in a way. And I'm pretty sure this won't be the last conversation we'll be having together.
Invite me back anytime. I'm down for you all. I love you both. I appreciate you.
Awesome.
We love you too. And we will definitely invite you back on the show.
Yes, I love it. And Nani, thank you for co-hosting as always. I appreciate you.
Yes, we appreciate you, Auntie Jen.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. No, thank you so much for saying that. And again, to our listeners, if you have found this episode very compelling and engaging and you want to interact with us, remember, we do have a phone number. You can leave us a voice message or text at 415-484-8329, or you can, find out where you can find us on our socials on our website, tfaproject.com. That's tfawproject.com. With that said, thank you so much for joining us, and we'll chat with you in the next episode. Tune in next time.
Bye.